He went from folding laundry to shooting down Japanese Zeros in less than 5 minutes.
This is the story of the man who wasn't supposed to fight, but refused to run. Every scar tells a story. Some heal, some don't. I'm the sergeant. These are the battle scars of those who serve.
There are moments in history when the entire world pivots on a single second, when the difference between life and death isn't rank, or training, or orders. It's instinct. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. If you were there at 7 a.m., you would have thought you were in paradise. The water was glass. The air smelled like salt and hibiscus. On the deck of the battleship USS West Virginia, the Wee V, the Sunday morning routine was slow and lazy. Sailors were nursing hangovers in their bunks. Others were writing letters to sweethearts back in Ohio or Kansas. Deep in the belly of that steel beast, a 22-year-old man named Doris Miller was waking up. Now, Miller wasn't an officer. He wasn't a gunner. He wasn't even a sailor in the way we think of them today. In the segregated Navy of 1941, Miller was a Mess Attendant Third Class. That was the only job a black man was allowed to have. His duty was to shine shoes, to clear tables, to make coffee for the white officers, to collect their laundry. Miller was a giant of a man, over 6 feet tall, more than 200 pounds of solid muscle. He was the ship's heavyweight boxing champion, but the Navy didn't care about his strength. They didn't care about his fighting spirit. To them, he was a servant in a uniform. At 7:50 a.m., Miller was down below decks, sorting a pile of laundry. He was picking up dirty shirts. 5 minutes later, the world ended. It didn't start with a siren. It started with a sound that felt like the earth splitting open. At 7:55 a.m., the first torpedo slammed into the port side of the West Virginia. Imagine the sound of a freight train colliding with a bell factory inside a tunnel. That is the sound of metal screaming as it tears. The ship didn't just shake, it lurched. Men were thrown from their bunks. The lights flickered, died, and were replaced by the blood-red glow of emergency bulbs. Miller didn't freeze. He didn't wait for orders. He dropped the laundry and ran. He scrambled up the ladder wells, moving toward his battle station. The air was already filling with thick, oily smoke. It smelled of burning rubber and cordite, a smell that sticks in the back of your throat and never really leaves. He burst onto the main deck and into a nightmare. The sky was swarming. Japanese Zeros, agile green killing machines with red circles on their wings, were screaming past at eye level. They were so low you could see the pilots' faces. They were strafing the deck, chewing up teak wood and steel and flesh. Miller reached his battle station, an anti-aircraft battery amidships. But it was gone. A torpedo had gutted it. The gun was twisted wreckage. The crew was dead. He was standing on a burning deck without a weapon, without a post, and without a purpose. That's when an officer grabbed him. Lieutenant Commander Johnson. He was shouting over the roar of explosions. "The captain! The captain is down!" Captain Mervyn Bennion, the commanding officer of the ship, was on the bridge. He had been hit by shrapnel from a bomb that exploded on the USS Tennessee next door. His stomach was torn open. He was dying. Miller followed the lieutenant to the bridge. It was an inferno. Debris was everywhere. Fires were blocking the exits. This is where Miller's size became his salvation. He moved through the fire like it wasn't there. He found the captain, a man in agony, refusing to leave his post, still trying to give orders while his life leaked out onto the deck. Miller scooped him up. He lifted the dying man with a gentleness that defied the chaos around them. He carried him through the smoke, shielding the captain's body with his own, moving him to a sheltered spot behind the conning tower. But there was no shelter. The West Virginia was taking hit after hit. She was sinking. The list was getting worse. The deck was tilting at a terrifying angle. Miller was now on the bridge with two junior officers, Lieutenant Frederick White and Ensign Victor Delano. They were trapped. The Japanese planes were circling like vultures, coming in for the kill. Lieutenant White spotted them first. Two Browning .50 caliber machine guns on the forward deck. They were unmanned. The gunners had been cut down. The lieutenant looked at Miller. He pointed to the ammo belts. He shouted for Miller to feed the ammunition while he fired. Miller stepped up to the gun. He grabbed the heavy belt of .50 caliber rounds. But the lieutenant was distracted by a fire breaking out near the con. He turned away. And in that split second, Doris Miller was left alone with the weapon. You have to understand what this meant. This wasn't just a gun. This was a machine. A .50 caliber Browning is a beast. It shakes the skeleton of the man holding it. It requires knowledge of loading, charging, aiming, and leading the target. And strictly speaking, it was illegal for Miller to touch it. A mess attendant was forbidden by Navy regulations to operate heavy weaponry. But as Miller looked up, he didn't see regulations. He saw a Japanese Zero diving straight for the bridge. He saw the face of the enemy that was sinking his home. Something in him snapped. Or maybe something in him finally woke up. He grabbed the spade grips. He found the charging handle and ripped it back. Clack, clack. He didn't wait for permission. He squeezed the butterfly trigger. The gun roared to life. Thump, 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 thump. The recoil slammed into his chest, vibrating through his arms, into his shoulders. It was a violent, rhythmic shaking that would terrify a lesser man. Miller didn't flinch. He later said, in the most understated quote of the war, "It wasn't hard. I just pulled the trigger, and she worked fine." For 15 minutes, the laundryman became the warrior. He wasn't just spraying bullets. He was hunting. He watched the tracers, those lines of fire arcing into the sky, and he walked them into the path of the enemy planes. He swung the massive gun barrel with his boxer's muscles, tracking the Zeros as they banked and dived. Imagine the sight. The ship is dying beneath his feet. The water around him is burning with oil. And there, standing tall in a white uniform, now stained with grease and soot, is Doris Miller, roaring back at the sky. Some witnesses said he downed 1 plane. Others said he downed 3. But the number doesn't matter. What matters is that he cleared the sky above the West Virginia. He forced the pilots to break off their attack. He bought time for his shipmates to escape the flames. He fired until the belt was empty. Then he loaded another. He fired until the gun ran dry. He fired until the order finally came. Abandon ship. The West Virginia settled into the mud of Pearl Harbor. Miller made his way down the tilting deck. He dove into the burning, oily water and swam for his life. He survived the morning. But the battle for recognition had just begun. In the days after the attack, the Navy released a list of commendations. They mentioned a Negro messman who had acted with heroism. They didn't even use his name, just unnamed Negro messman. It took the black press, newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier, to find out who he was. They demanded his name be known. They demanded he get the medal he deserved. And finally, on May 27, 1942, on the deck of the aircraft carrier Enterprise, Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, pinned the Navy Cross onto the chest of Doris Miller. He was the first African-American to ever receive the award. Nimitz said that day, This marks the first time in this conflict that such high tribute has been made in the Pacific Fleet to a member of his race. Doris Miller didn't survive the war. 2 years later, in 1943, he was serving on the escort carrier USS Liscombe Bay. A Japanese torpedo struck the ship's bomb magazine. The ship disintegrated in seconds. Doris Miller was never seen again. His body rests somewhere at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. But his story didn't die with the ship. Miller proved something that day in Pearl Harbor. He proved that courage doesn't have a race. He proved that heroism isn't about your rank or your job title or what you are allowed to do. When the world was burning, when the officers were down and the guns were silent, the cook stepped up. He broke the rules to save his brothers. And for 15 glorious minutes, he made the enemy regret the day they woke up the sleeping giant. This is Sergeant Narrates. Keep your powder dry.